Can't Hurt Me, by David Goggins. Introduction. Imagine this for a moment. It's the dead of night, long after the world has gone to sleep. You're working a job you hate, a job that feels like a slow death. You move through the empty kitchens of restaurants, a phantom in the dark, spraying for cockroaches and restocking rat traps. You're not just miserable, you feel like a ghost in your own life. You weigh nearly 300 pounds. Every morning, your ritual isn't a healthy breakfast or a morning jog, it's a large chocolate milkshake and a box of mini donuts. You look in the mirror and you don't recognize the person staring back. You see a man who has given up, a man drowning in excuses and self-pity. This was the life of a young man named David Goggins. Then one morning, exhausted after another soul-crushing shift, he collapses onto his couch and flips on the television. What comes on the screen isn't just another show. It's a documentary about the toughest military training in the world, the Navy SEALs. He watches these men, faces etched with pain and determination, suffering through icy water, carrying heavy logs, and pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. They are everything he is not. And in that moment, something inside him shifts. A tiny flicker of a question, a dangerous idea, begins to form in his mind. What if he could become one of them? It sounds impossible. A joke, even. But that single question would set him on a path to becoming what many now consider the toughest man on the planet. Hello, and welcome. Today, we're going to journey through one of the most raw and powerful books I've ever encountered, Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This isn't just a book, it's a blueprint for the human mind. Goggins has completed SEAL training, Army Ranger School, and Air Force Tactical Air Controller training, the only member of the U.S. Armed Forces to ever do so. He's run more than 60 ultramarathons, often placing in the top 5, and once held the world record for the most pull-ups done in 24 hours, completing a staggering 4,030. But this story isn't about superhuman genetics or God-given talent. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's the story of a man who started with nothing, who was dealt the worst hand imaginable, and who discovered that the most powerful weapon in the world is a mind that refuses to quit. By the end of our time together, you will understand the profound truth that you are probably living at only 40% of your true capability. And more importantly, you will have the tools to unlock the other 60%. This isn't about motivation. Goggins believes motivation is garbage. This is about building something permanent. Something he calls an armored mind. So, let's begin. Let's go back to the very beginning, to a beautiful house on a street called Paradise Road, where a young boy was living in hell. Book summary. There are some beginnings so dark they threaten to swallow any light that might follow. For David Goggins, his childhood was one of those beginnings. His family lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom home in a wealthy New York suburb. They had luxury cars in the garage, a Rolls-Royce, a Mercedes, a Corvette. To the outside world, they were the picture of the American dream. But as Goggins says, glossy surfaces reflect much more than they reveal. Behind closed doors, his father, Toughness Goggins, was a monster. He was a successful businessman who owned a popular roller skating rink called Skateland. But that business was built on the backs of his own family, who he treated not as loved ones, but as slaves. From the age of 6, David worked every single night at Skateland until well past midnight. He wasn't paid. He wasn't thanked. His job was to clean, organize skates, and later, work the rental counter. After the rink closed, he and his mother and brother would be the janitors, cleaning shit-filled toilets and scraping gum off the floor. They would finally get home around 6 a.m., just in time for David to get ready for school. He was perpetually exhausted in class, a first grader who could barely stay awake, let alone learn to read. But the exhaustion was the least of his problems. The real terror began at home. His father was a violent, controlling man who beat his mother senseless for the smallest perceived transgression. Goggins remembers one night vividly. After his mother shot his father a dirty look at the bar, Toughness waited until they got home. He took off his thick leather belt and said, "This belt came all the way from Texas just to whip you." He then proceeded to beat her, dragging her down the stairs by her hair. Young David, just a small boy, couldn't stand it. Overcome with a mixture of hatred and love, he jumped on his father's back, trying to fight him off. For his bravery, he was beaten with that same belt until welts covered his small body. His mother pressed the panic button for the alarm, and the police came. But when they arrived, his father charmed them, painting his wife as spoiled and himself as a generous husband just trying to instill discipline. The police chuckled and left without even speaking to his bruised and bleeding mother. In that moment, David understood a terrifying truth: no one was coming to save them. They were completely and utterly on their own. This abuse was compounded by relentless racism. As one of the only black kids in his school, he was tormented and called the N-word more times than he could count. Life had dealt him, as he puts it, a bad hand. He was born broken, living in a cyclone of terror and pain. His mother, Jackie, eventually found the courage to escape. One day, with nothing but a newly acquired credit card and a few garbage bags of clothes, she packed up David and his brother and fled. His father's parting words were a curse. "You have nothing and you are nothing without me," he told her. "You'll be a prostitute inside a year." They landed in a small town in Indiana called Brazil, moving into a tiny 600-square-foot apartment in public housing that cost $7 a month. They were free from the devil, but their new life was a struggle of a different kind. They were poor, surviving on welfare and food stamps. For a while, things seemed to get better. David was no longer living in constant fear, and for the first time since he could remember, he stopped wetting the bed. He was repeating the second grade, but under the care of a tough-as-nails nun named Sister Catherine, he finally started to learn to read. But the trauma he had endured wasn't gone. It was just dormant. In third grade, a new teacher, overwhelmed by his struggles, wanted to label him a special student and send him away. The threat triggered a deep-seated fear and anxiety in him. He developed a severe stutter overnight. His hair started falling out in patches, and white splotches appeared on his dark skin. He was suffering from what doctors now call toxic stress, a condition that can severely impact a child's brain development, memory, and ability to learn. Feeling cornered and ashamed, he found a way to survive school. He started to cheat. He became an expert at copying homework and glancing at his neighbors' tests. It worked. His grades improved enough to keep the teachers off his back, but he was creating a bigger problem. He was, in his own words, gaming himself. He was passing through the system without learning anything, solidifying a deep-seated belief that he was dumb and destined for failure. Life threw another brutal punch when David was in 8th grade. His mother had met a wonderful man named Wilmoth, who became the first healthy father figure David ever had. He was kind, stable, and was engaged to marry his mother. For the first time, a bright future seemed possible. Then, the day after Christmas, Wilmoth was murdered, shot 5 times in his own garage. The sky-blue future they had imagined was, as Goggins says, blown the fuck up. He was once again plunged into darkness, convinced that the world was just a place of endless tragedy that would eventually swallow him whole. As a teenager, he spiraled. He moved back and forth between Indiana and Indianapolis, trying to find a place to belong. He adopted a thuggish persona, sagging his pants and blasting loud music, not because he was tough, but because he was deeply insecure. He was living a lie, a fuck you fortune cookie whose message was always the same: You were born to fail. And for a long time, it seemed that message was true. He barely managed to keep his grades up through cheating. He failed the military entrance exam, the ASVAB, with a pathetic score of 20 out of 99 because, for the first time in years, he couldn't cheat. Then, a letter came from school. He had a D average and so many unexcused absences that he was on the verge of not graduating high school. That night, something broke. He went into the bathroom, looked at his reflection in the mirror, and didn't like the person he saw. He was, in his own words, a low-budget thug with no purpose and no future. And for the first time, he held himself accountable. He started talking to the man in the mirror, but he wasn't kind about it. He was raw and brutally honest. "You are one dumb motherfucker," he told himself. "You read like a third grader. You're a fucking joke. You've never tried hard at anything in your life. No more taking the easy way out. It's time to grow the fuck up." He grabbed a razor and, in a symbolic act of transformation, shaved his head clean. This moment was the birth of what he now calls the accountability mirror. It became his new ritual. Every day, he would stand in front of that mirror and hold himself accountable for his goals. He wrote his goals on post-it notes and stuck them to the mirror. Make your bed like you're in the military. Pull up your pants. Study for the ASVAB. This wasn't about self-love. It was about raw, uncomfortable truth. If you're fat, he says, admit it. Tell yourself, I'm fucking fat, so you can start the hard work of changing it. If you've been living like a coward, call yourself out on it so you can find your courage. You have to be cruel to yourself, he argues, to become better. This new ritual ignited a fire in him. He became obsessed with improving himself. The kitchen table became his 24/7 study hall. He learned that the only way for information to stick in his damaged brain was through sheer, brute force repetition. He would read a page of a textbook, then write it down word for word. Then do it again, and again, sometimes 3 times, just to memorize a single page. It was grueling, inefficient work, but he did it. He went from a 4th grade reading level to that of a high school senior in just 6 months. He attacked his physical fitness with the same ferocity. He woke up at 5 a.m. to lift weights and ran for miles in the dark. He began to brainwash himself into craving discomfort. If it was raining, he'd go run. If it was snowing, he'd get his shoes on. He was callusing his mind. He retook the ASVAB, and on his 3rd try, he passed, meeting the minimum standard for the Air Force. His one dream was to join pararescue, the elite combat search and rescue specialists. He made it through boot camp and into the pararescue training pipeline. He was strong, fast, and excelled at almost everything. But there was one thing he couldn't conquer: the water. He had a deep-seated fear of the water, and pararescue training involved weeks of water confidence, which was really just a nice way of saying they tried to drown you. He passed the evolutions, but the fear and anxiety consumed him. When a minor medical issue gave him an excuse, the discovery that he had the sickle cell trait, he took it. Though the doctors later cleared him to continue, he used the medical scare as an out. On paper, he didn't quit. But in his heart, he knew he had. And that failure haunted him. He served 4 years in the Air Force in a different role, but he carried the shame of quitting with him every day. He buried that shame under layers of muscle, and then fat. He got into powerlifting, and his weight ballooned. After leaving the military, he continued to bulk up until he was nearly 300 pounds of muscle and flab. He took a dead-end, minimum-wage job working the night shift as a security guard, and then another one, spraying for cockroaches at Ecolab. He was married to a woman whose father had once called him a nigger, living a life he couldn't afford, fueled by chocolate milkshakes and donuts. He was miserable, numb, and going through the motions, a zombie selling his time on Earth. Which brings us back to that fateful morning on the couch. Watching those SEALs suffer on TV, he saw everything he wasn't. They were driven, proud, and lived a life of excellence. He was mediocrity personified. He became obsessed. For weeks, he called Navy recruiters all over the country, telling them he wanted to be a SEAL. Most turned him down. One recruiter in Indianapolis laughed in his face when he saw the 297-pound man who showed up at his office. But Goggins was persistent. Through sheer luck, he finally connected with one of the best recruiters in the Navy, a man named Stephen Shalio. Shalio saw something in him, a flicker of drive, but he also saw the scale. The maximum weight for a man of Goggins's height was 191 pounds. Goggins had less than 3 months to lose 106 pounds. It was an impossible task. And that's when his life truly began. What followed was a brutal, self-imposed regimen of suffering. He woke up at 4:30 a.m. and spent hours on a stationary bike, then hours in the pool, then hours in the gym doing endless reps. His only real meal of the day was a small chicken breast and some vegetables. He was constantly hungry, constantly exhausted, and constantly fighting the voice in his head that told him it was impossible. But the weight started to melt off. In 2 weeks, he dropped 25 pounds. Soon, he was light enough to start running again. The progress fueled him. He lived at the edge of his own mortality, but he kept going. In under 3 months, he lost 106 pounds. He had done the impossible. He got into BUD/S, the 6-month basic underwater demolition/SEAL training program. But his journey was far from over. He was rolled back from his first class after contracting double pneumonia during Hell Week, the infamous 5.5-day stretch of non-stop physical torment with almost no sleep. He was rolled back a second time after fracturing his kneecap. This meant he would have to endure Hell Week not once, not twice, but 3 times in a single year. It was during his third attempt, running on 2 legs that were riddled with stress fractures, that he truly forged his mind. He had to show up to the base early every single morning to wrap his lower legs and feet in multiple layers of socks and duct tape, just to immobilize his fractured shin bone so he could run. The first 30 minutes of every run were pure, excruciating torture. How do you keep going when every step feels like shattered glass? Goggins developed another mental tool, one he calls the cookie jar. The cookie jar is an imaginary place in your mind where you store all of your past victories and accomplishments. Not just the big ones, but the small ones too. When you are in the midst of suffering, when your mind is begging you to quit, you reach into that cookie jar and pull out a memory of a time you overcame the odds. He remembered studying for hours to pass the ASVAB. That was a cookie. He remembered losing all that weight. That was a big cookie. He remembered surviving his first Hell Week. Another cookie. By remembering what he had already overcome, he could remind himself of the badass he truly was, giving him the fuel to push through the present pain. This is a critical lesson. We often focus on our failures, but Goggins teaches us to weaponize our successes. Use them as fuel. When you feel like you have nothing left, your cookie jar reminds you that you've been in the fire before and survived. He also discovered what he calls the 40% rule. Goggins believes that when our mind tells us we are done, that we're exhausted, that we cannot possibly go any further, we are actually only at 40% of our true capability. The feeling of being maxed out is just a signal from our internal governor, a protective mechanism in our brain that wants to keep us safe and comfortable. The key to pushing past 40% is to callous your mind. It's like lifting weights. The first time you do it, your hands are soft and they tear. But over time, you build calluses, and what once hurt becomes manageable. Goggins argues that we must do the same with our minds by consistently and intentionally seeking out discomfort and suffering. Run in the rain. Take the stairs. Do the things you hate doing every single day. Each time you push past that 40% barrier, you recalibrate your governor and expand what you believe to be possible. Armed with these mental tools, Goggins not only graduated Bud/S, becoming just the 36th African American Navy SEAL in history, but he went on to graduate from Army Ranger School, where he was named the Enlisted Honor Man. He was becoming, in his own words, uncommon amongst uncommon. He sought out the hardest challenges in the world, not for glory, but to see what he was truly capable of. This quest led him to the world of ultra-endurance racing. It started as a way to raise money for the families of fallen special operations warriors. To qualify for his first race, the brutal Badwater 135, a 135-mile run through Death Valley in the middle of summer, he had to run 100 miles in a 24-hour race with only 3 days' notice and zero training. He did it. He ran 101 miles in under 19 hours. But the effort nearly killed him. At mile 70, he was pissing blood and shitting himself in a lawn chair. His feet were a mess of broken blisters and cracked toenails. His body was completely shutting down. But he reached into his cookie jar, applied the 40% rule, and kept going. That experience taught him that the human body can withstand a hell of a lot more than we think, but it all begins and ends in the mind. He went on to finish Badwater, placing 5th in his first attempt. He competed in the Ultraman World Championships, a 3-day, 320-mile race, and came in second. He was redefining the limits of human endurance. But life, as it always does, had another test for him. At the peak of his athletic career, his body began to fail him in a mysterious way. His heart rate, normally in the low 30s, was suddenly spiking into the 200s during light exercise. Doctors were baffled. Finally, an echocardiogram revealed the shocking truth. David Goggins had been born with an atrial septal defect, a hole in his heart. Think about that for a moment. All these incredible feats, 3 hell weeks, Ranger School, Badwater, Ultraman, he did it all with a heart that was only getting about half the oxygen it needed. The doctors called him a medical marvel. To Goggins, it was the ultimate proof of his philosophy. It wasn't genetics. It wasn't talent. It was the power of a calloused mind that had allowed him to perform at an elite level with a broken engine. He underwent 2 heart surgeries to fix the defect. The recovery was long and difficult, and for a time, it seemed his days as an elite operator and athlete were over. He could have retired, content with a legacy that was already legendary. But Goggins doesn't have a finish line. He believes we are either getting better or getting worse. There is no staying the same. He had to reinvent himself yet again. Unable to run, he turned his obsessive focus to a new challenge, the world record for pull-ups. After 2 grueling, public failures, one on live TV where his hands were torn to shreds, he analyzed every mistake in what he calls an after-action report, a military debriefing process. He adjusted his strategy, learned from his failures, and on his 3rd attempt, in a gritty CrossFit gym in Nashville, he broke the record, completing 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours. His journey is a testament to the power of embracing failure. To Goggins, failure is not an endpoint, it's an opportunity. It's the ultimate tool for growth. He says he learned more from his 2 failed attempts at the pull-up record than he ever would have if he'd succeeded on the first try. Failure gives you the data you need to get better. It shows you your weaknesses. It humbles you. And if you have the courage to face it, analyze it, and come back stronger, failure becomes the most powerful fuel you can have. In the end, this incredible, raw, and unfiltered story comes down to a single, powerful question that Goggins urges us all to ask ourselves when we face our own limits, our own doubts, and our own fears. What if? What if I'm capable of more than I think? What if all this pain is just a gateway to a stronger version of myself? What if the very things I'm running from are the keys to my freedom? It's a question that silences negativity and unlocks the door to your untapped potential. It's the question that can change everything. Commentary. There are books that you read, and then there are books that you experience. Can't Hurt Me is an experience. It's not a gentle, encouraging pat on the back. It's a bucket of ice water to the face, a screaming drill sergeant in your ear telling you to get up and get after it. What I find so profound about David Goggins' story is that it completely demolishes the myth of talent. We live in a culture that worships the natural, the gifted athlete, the brilliant artist, the genius entrepreneur. We tell ourselves that some people are just born with it. Goggins' life is a powerful counter-narrative to that idea. He wasn't born with anything but disadvantages. He was a victim of abuse, poverty, racism, and learning disabilities. He was overweight and afraid of the very things, water and heights, that his chosen profession demanded he master. His story proves that greatness is not something you are born with. It is something you build, one grueling, painful step at a time. The secret isn't a magic pill or a life hack. The secret is work. Hard, relentless, obsessive work. It's about being willing to suffer, to get uncomfortable, and to keep going when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to stop. The most powerful lesson for me, and I believe for anyone, is the concept of the calloused mind. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid pain and seek comfort. Goggins flips that on its head. He teaches us that pain and suffering are not obstacles to be avoided, but tools to be used. They are the friction we need to grow stronger. By intentionally putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, we build mental resilience. We raise our baseline for what we can handle, not just in a workout, but in life. When you face a difficult project at work, a conflict in a relationship, or a personal setback, a calloused mind doesn't panic. It doesn't look for the easy way out. It assesses the situation, accepts the difficulty, and gets to work. So, how can you start applying these lessons today? You don't have to run 100 miles or do 4,000 pull-ups. The principles are scalable to any life. First, start with your own accountability mirror. Tonight, before you go to bed, stand in front of your mirror and have an honest conversation with yourself. What are you avoiding? Where are you taking the easy way out? Write down one goal on a Post-it note and stick it on that mirror. Make it the first thing you see in the morning and the last thing you see at night. Second, build your cookie jar. Take out a journal and write down every obstacle you've ever overcome. Passing a tough exam. Finishing a project you didn't think you could. Standing up for yourself. The next time you feel like quitting, mentally reach for one of those cookies. Remember the feeling of that victory and use it as fuel. And third, embrace the 40% rule. The next time you're working out and you feel that urge to stop, push just a little bit further. Do one more rep. Run one more minute. The goal isn't to injure yourself, it's to teach your mind that you are in control, not your temporary feelings of discomfort. David Goggins' story is extreme, but its message is universal. It's a reminder that the limits we place on ourselves are often imaginary. We are all capable of so much more than we think. We just have to be willing to go to war with the one person who can truly stop us, ourselves. That was a summary of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. We certainly hit the big ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary, no matter how detailed, can only give you a glimpse of the real thing. The true power of this book is in Goggins' unfiltered voice, in the raw, visceral details of his journey. Reading it is an experience that can genuinely shake you to your core and force you to re-evaluate what you believe is possible. This summary is meant to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about today has struck a chord, if you felt a spark of that fire, I encourage you to grab a copy. The link is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets us know we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep challenging ourselves and growing together.